Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching Welcome to Plathville. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor, and I'm going to react to the show as I watch it.
I want to go. I want to go.
It was a bad example for the younger children. Mike and Mariah kept pushing the limits, and it was just time for them to move out.
There's freedom, but there's also consequences for anything you do.
Wow. So the two of them moved out. Micah is of age. He is an adult, but Mariah is still, I think she's still a minor, which isn't unheard of. There are situations where minors will move out, particularly with family members, but it's a little unusual. So let me think about this, because this is a big change for Mariah. She really probably wanted to move out. I'm guessing Micah did too. We didn't see much of Micah's displeasure with the parents, season 1. Mariah, we certainly did. So I'm guessing Mariah was really pushing for this and that the parents allowed it. It's pretty interesting, actually. And as a family therapist, I've worked with families like this where they just say, you know what, you're 17, why don't we just try you moving out? We're still going to have rules, and as long as you follow those rules, like you have a job and you don't go in with the wrong crowd, we'll let you live at this family member's house. And if everything goes well, then everyone wins. You win because you get your freedom. You don't have to deal with this anymore. And we win because you're not yelling at us all the time, and you're not trying to defy our rules all the time. Now, people from the outside might think this is a problem, and it might be, for the parents to let a child move out early. Could put the child at risk. Mariah might be at risk of a lot of dangerous behavior because she's not old enough to make decisions for herself. But the thing that I always thought, because this was often a conundrum for me that families would bring to me, where you'd have a 16 or 17-year-old kid who really, really wanted their freedom and would love to move out, and the parents were kind of willing to let the kid move out, but because they believe the state laws are such that they couldn't do that, or they would feel like bad parents. And I never knew the exact answer. It was always different given the different situations, and there was never really a good answer. But the thing that I often thought about was, up until not that long ago in the United States, and even around the world in other countries, other societies, 16, 17 is considered an adult. You're free to have a job, you're free to move out, you're free to have kids, you're free to get married. There's something about Western society where we push the adult age older and older as time moves forward. I wouldn't be surprised if in 100 years they push it to 20. That's when you're an adult. And there's various reasons for that, and there's pros and cons. The pros is that you allow for people's brains and maturity to develop further before they move out if you hold on to them longer. But then you're going to have some kids that, shall we say, might be born or their personality developed in such a way that they're ready to be independent at 16 and 17. Now, I'm not saying you let kids go. I'm just saying that it's not strange, given our society, given our history, given our biology, if you will, that we have some 16 and some 17-year-olds who just are dying to get out from underneath their parents' thumb. And we shouldn't pathologize it. We should say, like, well, it's probably, if you grew up in another time, if you grew up in another society, you'd be free to move out at this point. But you live in this society, which wants to hold on to you a little longer. So can you hold on a little bit longer? You'll be free. You'll have decades of freedom ahead of you. Just hold on for another couple years. But anyway, so we're seeing that they've moved out, and we'll see how they handle it. I'm pretty surprised that the parents agreed to this. Maybe it was even their idea. Maybe we'll hear.
I got a little camcorder from one of my, that's how you say it, right?
Yeah, I think so.
From one of my jobs. And we're just kind of playing around with it. All right, let's show you the bathroom next.
I picked out the shower curtain.
She got the shower curtain?
In the last 6 months, so much has changed. I moved out of the house, / got kicked out. I didn't.
All right, so a little bit more background. I'm guessing we'll get more background on that from the parents. She moved out / got kicked out. So I'm guessing that the conflict escalated, and the parents said, unless you do X, Y, and Z, you're out, and Mariah probably said, fine, I'm moving out to Micah's place.
I didn't clean up my room, but it's like, that's okay because this is just how I am. I had got to the point where I was just starving for freedom and like just didn't follow the rules my parents had set. Red shoes. I have like
All right, a little bit more detail that she wasn't following the rules, and the parents, I guess, kicked her out, and she considered it to be a mutual decision of moving out. That's interesting.
They tried to control like literally everything. What we ate, what we wore, jeans, or any type of tank top was like out of the question to wear. Swimsuits were an absolute no. I'm sure my parents meant well by raising us the way that they did, but I just felt like an outsider in the real world. It didn't feel normal.
Right. I think that the key to the way Mariah felt in relation to her parents wasn't necessarily the parenting style of the isolated, no sugar, no alcohol, no jeans, no tank tops lifestyle. I think that it was that she felt like an outsider. I imagine that regardless of where this family was situated, if they were in the middle of the city and well integrated with the community in the way that mainstream families are, I'm guessing that Mariah still would have felt angry and resentful and hurt and wanted to move out early. I saw it all the time. And when we look at the parents and the way that they parent, it's tempting to blame their parenting style for why Mariah feels this way. But take it from me as a family therapist. All the families that I dealt with were mainstream families where the kids went to public school. A few of them would be homeschooled, but most of them went to public school and had cell phones and drank Coca-Cola and had friends, and yet they still absolutely despised their parents' authority and wanted to move out. So I would suspect that this is an emotional effect or an effect of an emotional problem in the family and not an effect of the style in which the family was raised. Because we see the other kids and they seem to be fine with it. Now, who knows? Because the whole speculation that I've been kind of mentioning occasionally is there a chance that all the kids, or many of the kids, are really quite resentful of the way that they were raised? Not only just in isolation, but also emotionally speaking. And they are suppressing that or not expressing that because they don't feel safe to. There are plenty of people, when you ask them at the age of 21 about their parents, they're like, yeah, my parents are great. You ask them when they're 35, and they will say, no, my parents had big problems, and I just didn't want to talk about it, or I couldn't really admit it, or I didn't feel safe enough to admit it when I was 21. So there's a possibility of that, but I never want to jump to that conclusion. I don't want to be one of those therapists. It's really a cliche for therapists to just assume that parents are bad and that they're pathological. As a family therapist, I actually pride myself on really, regardless of who the client is, that people are essentially innocent until proven guilty. Meaning that until I'm really convinced that something is wrong, I'm not going to look for something that's wrong. Unless someone gives me a reason to investigate that, like multiple children talking about how the parents have an abusive style of parenting. And maybe we'll find that out this season, and maybe we won't. Let's continue watching.
Today? Mm-hmm. That's really sweet.
It was sweet of her.
It's been probably 3 or 4 months since I've seen my siblings. I'm really not allowed to see my younger siblings unless my parents are there. I still try to keep a positive attitude about it, but it is hard at times.
Whose turn is it to go grocery shopping?
All right, that's a pretty big change for these two, that they're not allowed to see the kids without the parents there. And I'm guessing that they're not enthusiastic to, I don't know, I wonder what, so we didn't hear much from Micah about how it's, from the first season, he seemed fine with his parents. He seemed like he wanted a little bit of freedom, but he didn't seem to have the anger or upsetness that Mariah had. But so I wonder what's going on there. And again, it lends itself, it's a little bit of an indication that maybe there's something much deeper going on in this family that they're not talking about. Maybe they'll get into it this season, given that we have these two who are, at least Mariah, likely to out the parents for what they've done. So let's continue watching.
I want to just show you a couple things in the house that need to get done. So
now they live in suburbia, or rural suburbia, not far away from Micah and Mariah, even though they don't see Micah and Mariah very often. It's interesting.
Buy what we want.
Yeah.
All right, now sodas, but you not tell Mom needs to know we're having soda.
And it was likely to me that they might plant seeds of rebellion and bitterness in the younger children, especially Isaac and Amber. We talked it over with Micah and Mariah and agreed that if they couldn't live with our rules, then they needed to move out.
Okay, so they were having all their rules, and they continued, the parents, to have this point of view of, or at least Kim, this point of view of, you're either with us or you're against us. You're either completely compliant with all of our rules, or we're going to have a big problem. Instead of being flexible and adjusting things, I don't know. We would have to talk to the mom to hear the whole story, but it's unfortunate that they couldn't find at least a little bit of a middle ground. Like, well, in this, when I grew up with a lot of siblings, and it was pretty clear that at a certain age, you were given certain responsibilities, but the kids younger than that age didn't have any of those responsibilities. So you could imagine in this family, they could say, well, for Mariah's age and Micah's age, since they're the oldest kids still living at home, I'm looking at my family tree over here, then they're allowed to maybe leave the house when they want to. They're allowed to go to movies with friends. They're allowed to go on the internet. They're allowed to have a cell phone or whatever it was that the two kids wanted. But everyone younger than that, they're not allowed that. So what was the barrier between having that very normal parenting structure for different ages of different kids? Or were they worried, I think this is what it was, that the older kids would influence the younger kids in a very negative way, maybe even against God. This family is very religious, but they don't talk about it on the show. And I wonder how much religion and maybe even politics play in their decisions and how they see the world. I don't know. Maybe not at all. Maybe it's just the way they parent. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was a heavy dose of religious dogma involved in their parenting and in their views of you're either with God or you're with the devil, and there's no in between. When there's certain, I don't know if this is Kim, but there are plenty of people who believe that if you're not completely with God, then you're essentially with the devil. If you're not completely living the life that has been defined by our sect of Christianity, then you are living the life of a devil person. Even if you don't really ascribe to devil worship, the fact that you're not completely 100% with God means you are on the other side of the fence and you are living the life of a sinner, maybe even going to hell. Again, who knows if that's Kim's situation, but I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility, or at least like some version of that, some degree of that. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. But anyway, so Kim said we had these rules. They didn't want to follow the rules, and so we said you either follow the rules or you're out. And it sounds like Micah and Mariah were like, great, then we're out. Are you saying we can move out? Because we choose to move out. And now they're going to learn, I guess, how to pay the bills and whatnot.
I have a little bit of reservations about it with the fact that she's still 17, but she's just down the street. She knows if she needs us anytime, we're here for her. Do you guys have...
From the sound of it, the way that Micah was saying, they have hardly any contact with the parents. But the parents seem to think, well, if Mariah needs anything, we're just 2 blocks away. Maybe they're much more involved in Mariah's life than it seems. I don't know. Let's continue watching.
The measuring tape. That doesn't measure.
I know where one is.
Where?
Upstairs.
Wow, you want to run and get it?
I'll go get it.
So let me talk a little bit about emancipation, because maybe some of y'all are having that on your mind. If you don't know, there's this legal term called emancipation where children before they're 18 are allowed to become essentially an adult, legally speaking. And as a family therapist, I would run into a lot of teenagers who would be 12 years old, 13, 14, and saying, I'm going to get emancipated, they would say. And I was a family therapist working with defiant teenagers for 10, 15 years and would go to courts often for various different reasons and really learned the legal process of emancipation in my area, in the Seattle area. And I'm guessing it's similar around the United States, in which kids will petition the court. The child will go to the court and say, "Judge, please give me the rights of an adult prior to me being an adult." That's what emancipation is. What a lot of people, which you could imagine it would be hard to convince a judge to give you the rights of an adult prior to you being an adult, particularly if you're 13. What a lot of people consider emancipation to be, because there's all these rumors among kids, that emancipation is just like you just sign a thing and you get emancipated. No. Let me tell you about the one teenager. I probably talked to hundreds of teenagers who were trying to be emancipated. I knew one teenager who successfully was emancipated, and let me tell you her story. She was, her parents died. Actually, her mother died in her arms when she was a young child. So she was an orphan, and she went into the foster care system. And she went from home to home, and she had a lot of bad experiences. And she landed in one home, and that foster mother was very stern, maybe even abusive. She was sexually assaulted and got pregnant from the sexual assault, had the child, and was raising the child from the age of like 12 or 13 while in foster care, and did a good enough job, especially for a 13-year-old, 14-year-old raising an infant, with the support of the foster family and social services and therapists, by the way. And then she starts to go down the emancipation process because she's raising a child. She doesn't like her foster parent. She feels responsible enough. And she got kicked out of school earlier, so she was in an alternative school. And by the way, whenever I talk about clients, because of confidentiality, I either turn things around a little bit, or I obscure things, or I generalize things such that you would never be able to identify the person. Plus, this was a long time ago. Anyway, so she got a job, and she also got a social worker who specialized in helping people get emancipated. So she convinced a social worker, "Please help me with the judge on getting myself emancipated." And the whole process of emancipation took a couple years, by the way. So she started it when she was 15, and she completed it when she was 17 and a half. She was just like 5 months away from becoming 18, at which point she didn't need to be emancipated. She would be an adult at that point. But what she had to do was she had to go to alternative school, never skip, get good grades. She had to get a job, and she got a job. She had to get her own health insurance. She had to get health insurance for her child, and she had to sustain that lifestyle for 6 months, maybe even a year, and go to court and go to the social worker and go to therapy and be a good kid at the foster home and do all these things for months, if not years. And then 5 months before she turned 18, the judge says, "Yes, I emancipate you." And this is a person who went through terrible, terrible abuse growing up and had really turned things around and had a ton of strength and didn't use drugs or alcohol and didn't stay out late. And this kid, it took a long time to become emancipated. The kids that I would talk to, the typical ones that would be wanting to be emancipated, they skipped school, sometimes never even went. Their grades were, down the toilet. They were actively using drugs, usually marijuana, sometimes selling it out of their own house. They were running away for days at a time. They were talking back to their parents. They didn't have a job. They didn't have health insurance. They didn't have a way to pay their bills. And they were telling me, "Okay, Kirk, help me become emancipated." And I would tell them the story of the one person I knew that got emancipated. And they'd be like, "Really? Because I've heard my friends talking about emancipation, like you just sign a thing." And I'm like, "Yeah, rumors among 13-year-olds. What are you going to do?" So that's usually at least in my, maybe it's changed in the past 10 years, but that was the experience that I had. But there is a way in which families can consent, parents can consent to having kids under certain circumstances move out of the house and have it not be considered child abuse, essentially. Because if we saw the parents letting Mariah at the age of 17 move out, and Mariah was living like in a crack house or living under a bridge or going into sex work or something, then you would call Child Protective Services and you would say the parents are neglecting their responsibilities as parents and it's harming Mariah, even though the child wants to do those things, but that doesn't matter. The parents are responsible, at the very least, to try to prevent that child. Sometimes it's impossible to prevent a child from doing what they want to do. Believe me, as a family therapist, I saw that. But that would be the beginning, and then usually there would be what they call a CHINS petition, a child in need of services. Social workers get involved, and then therapists get involved, and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I thought I'd just mention the emancipation process because it never comes up on this when I watch any reality TV show, but I thought it'd be a chance for me to talk about that. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of others because we all deserve it. We really, really do.